And one of the things that I try to make clear is that without love, our mission in this school is useless and amounts to nothing. That without love, we are never going to fulfill what God has ultimately asked us to do. And so therefore, the foundation of everything that happens in this place, and everything that happens in the classroom, is not about some academic achievement or some ascent to some form of knowledge. It's not about just learning and getting facts and information and mastering information. Ultimately, what happens in the classroom should be rooted and founded upon love. That if we had the greatest sports teams, if we had the greatest head of school, it would be wonderful. Right? If we had the greatest faculty, the greatest teachers, if we had the greatest everything, but did not have love, it would amount to nothing. Scripture is very clear that love is our calling and our vocation. Now, I don't know if anybody, students, I don't know if anybody's asked you this question, all right, but I can remember very vividly when I was your age, roughly your age, and as I got older, it became more and more poignant. But the question was, what do you want to be when you grow up? All right, what do you want to be when you grow up? That question was prominent as I was growing up. And as I got older, it became more important because as I went through high school and then went into college, that question, what do you want to be when you grow up, became packed with pressure. Because it was connected to a career. It was connected to a job. And that is a livelihood. And then even more so as you start to marry and you start to have children, that idea of what you're supposed to be, all right, what you're supposed to do in this world defines you. It sometimes depends, that question, what you're going to be when you grow up, depends on how much money you're going to make. And it ultimately leads to a lot of decisions that you will make. That question, what you want to be when you grow up, in some cases can drive you and determine the rest of your life. Our society puts a lot of pressure on you. And one of the reasons that they put you in school, one of the reasons you are in school, is to answer that question. What are you going to be when you grow up? You'll often get a question like, also, what's your favorite subject? And some people say math, and some will say history, and some will say English. Some, it is dependent upon your favorite teacher, who knows? But they're asking that question with an eye towards someday, well, maybe you'll go into that subject. Hey, if you like math and science, maybe you'll be an engineer, right? Or maybe you'll be a scientist someday. They're asking you those questions because they think, in many cases, life is dependent upon what you're going to do as a career and vocation. But Scripture is incredibly clear. The passage we read today was about love. 1 Corinthians 13 that I talked about on the first Wednesday was about love. And this passage in 1 John is about love. And it makes it very clear that love is your vocation. That love is what you're supposed to do. That whatever you do to make money is all well and good. And hopefully God has called you to that. But that is not the definition of who you are. The definition of who you are as a student right now, and as a student as you go through the years, and then when you graduate, and maybe you go to college or maybe you go into a career right away, regardless of that, your vocation is singular. And that is to love God. That is the commandment of the Lord, is to love. And that is what you are called to do. You are called to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And 1 John makes it very clear, the definition of that love is God himself. And so therefore, the only way to replicate the love of God is to know God so well that you are behaving and acting like him on a regular basis. If our vocation is to love other people the way that he loved us, there's only one way we can fulfill that vocation. And it is not going to be learned in a classroom necessarily. It is not going to be, all right, from knowing your history facts. It's not going to be from being able to do your times tables, all right, or your addition or arithmetic or solve an equation, all right. That is not going to be ultimately what determines how you fulfill your vocation. The only way you can fulfill your calling is to know God so well, because he is love. you can love other people. Now, to illustrate this, I want to tell a story. I told a story last year to some of our seniors and juniors. I think it's one of the most powerful stories I've ever experienced, so I'm going to share it with you. It's a very personal story. But I have a brother, many of you know this, that I help take care of. My brother has cerebral palsy and many mental handicaps. He has something called microcephalia. Microcephalia is a smaller head. And because of that disability, he cannot take care of himself. And he's not totally disabled, and the amazing thing is, he was able to go through school in a specialized way and eventually graduate high school. Now, at the same time, he's never been able to live on his own without care. My parents took care of him all the way until they eventually both passed away, and that was just 3 or 4 years ago. And then I took over responsibility for taking care of my brother. Now, my brother and I grew up in a retreat center in the hills of Arkansas. And when I say the hills of Arkansas, I mean the hills of Arkansas. Back in the woods, back in the mountains. My father had a Christian retreat center, and it was a retreat center. It was set apart from everything. It was in the middle of nowhere. And when my brother was in high school, we went to high school one day, and my brother had friends. He had a lot of friends. Right? He got accepted into the school. It was a really great, wonderful thing. But then when he graduated high school, there was a real problem, and that was the fact that he was pretty much stuck at home. And then I went off to college. He didn't have anybody but my parents. There's only 4 of us in our family. And so therefore, he didn't have a lot of friends outside of my father or my mother. My mother went to work every day. My dad ran the retreat center. He would go off and preach places. And so my brother was totally alone for the most part. And he was totally dependent. If he wanted to see people outside the family, my parents had to take him somewhere. Or people had to come visit him, which wasn't very often. And so therefore, my brother didn't have a lot of friends. Didn't have a lot of friends outside the family. He was fine. He was being taken care of. But he didn't have anybody he could call his own. Well, one summer, an individual named Mike came and lived at the retreat center. That was part of my dad's ministry. Is that individuals who had trouble in life, who maybe were addicted to something, or who needed to get away, they could come and they could live at the retreat center, they could work at the retreat center for room and board, and my father would minister to them, or take care of them, and help them out in whatever way they needed to. And Mike arrived one summer to take advantage of this retreat center. And Mike, though, despite all of his troubles, had a very interesting talent. He could pay attention to my brother like nobody else could. Now, part of my brother's disability is he cannot communicate very well. He does not speak correctly. He speaks with a kind of a stutter. And part of his disability is the encoding process. He knows exactly what he wants to say, and you can see it. He will talk to you, and you can see him struggling to say or speak. And then it takes a long time for him to eventually get it out. And for that reason, a lot of people who want to do well, who want to speak my brother, they get really impatient. And they won't let him speak. And that gets very frustrating for my brother, who knows what he wants to say. He's very intelligent, right? He's got it in his brain, he knows what he is, but he can't say it, he can't speak it. So most people, even when they want to do well by him, they don't have the patience to listen to him. Mike had an incredible ability to listen to my brother. And he would wait, and he would make a connection. And over that summer, Mike and my brother, his name is Andrew, became best of friends. And Andrew started calling Mike my brother. And that was something incredibly special. He never used a phrase like that in his entire life. Even his brother, right, who had grown up with him, I wasn't his buddy. My dad, who watched over and cared for him, and they spent hours together, wasn't his buddy. Mike was his buddy. And Mike poured himself into my brother as well. Treated him special. The first opportunity he had to make some money, he went out and he bought a $300 car. But the first thing he did with that car was he took Andrew to the movies in a town about 40 minutes away. Just the two of them. This was incredibly special for him to go do something special. And Mike continued to develop a relationship. He went out and would take him to breakfast without my dad doing it. And it was somebody, it was an opportunity to have a relationship with somebody that wasn't part of his family. And Mike and Andrew grew closer and closer and closer together. And then a few months after the summer ended, I think maybe even Thanksgiving time, because I was back on break. And I'll never forget this. I was asleep in my bed early in the morning, and my father was standing at my door. And he said, he woke me up by saying, Mike is gone. I said, what do you mean Mike's gone? He says, he packed up his car and he left, and all I did was leave a note. And my dad was crying, and he said, he didn't even bother to say goodbye to Andrew. And now, I had grown up with my brother. My brother's incredibly tough. I mean, he get part of his expressions. He can't even express pain when he's in pain. He just endures it. And I had grown up with my brother, and I never once, despite all of the experiences he never had, I never really seen him cry. And my brother cried for 3 days. Did not stop. Could not eat and bawl for 3 days because Mike was gone. And in his letter, Mike expressed all these reasons. He said, I can't take it anymore. I can't do this. All right? It's too hard. It's too difficult. He took everything he had and some of the things that he didn't have. He even robbed my dad out of his office. Got in the car and took off. Now, the response of my father, who was one of the holiest men I know or knew, who was my hero, and the response of myself, all right, who was at that time in a seminary learning to be a pastor and learning how to express the gospel, and the response of our friends was anything but love. Because we loved Andrew, and because Mike had wronged Andrew, we wanted revenge. We wanted to see harm if we could possibly get to Mike, because Mike had hurt Andrew that bad. To watch him cry was one of the hardest things I'd ever seen in my life. He was broken spiritually as well as physically in that moment. It was one of the hardest things I ever had to endure. And I'll never forget this. All right? In the midst of all of this, we started to chastise Mike, to say bad things about him, saying, what a bum, he's always been this way. It must be his nature. Grace has not found Mike. All right? There's no way, all right, that somebody would treat anyone like that if he really knew God. That was our response. And right before church, think about that, right before church, there were a group of men standing around talking about how bad Mike was, about how evil Mike was. How dare he hurt our friend and my brother. And we're all saying bad things about this guy named Mike. And as clear as day, in the middle of that circle walked my brother, standing upright without his normal limb. And he stood in the middle of the circle and he pointed his finger and he said, I don't care what Mike has done. He's still my buddy. And he turned around and he walked out of the circle of the church. Now there's a number of things to be said about that. Not the least of which is, the holier-than-thou group were totally convicted. Because Andrew had just shown us what love is. That is love. That he could say, I don't care what Mike has done and how much he has hurt me. He's still my buddy. He's still my buddy. That attitude changed everything in that retreat center. Each and every one of us who had been chastising Mike said, maybe we should think about Mike and who he is as an individual, as a person. That attitude that Andrew had shown us, the broken, the hurt person, that attitude showed us what it's like to live life. Because we all have individuals who have wronged and hurt us. We all have people who do not deserve our love. And if you really think about it, what Mike had done is exactly what the disciples had done to Jesus. When the going got really tough, when the going got really hard, the disciples in the middle of the night packed up and headed off. And Jesus hung on the cross and said, I don't care what they've done, I still love them. That is your calling. To love like that is your calling, no matter what it costs, or how much it hurts, or how you've been wronged, or what is due you, or what rights you have, or think you have. You are to go into this world and love people, to hang on a cross and say, I love people this much. This is my commandment, that you love one another the way that I have loved you. And the only way that Jesus demonstrated his love, or among the many ways, is he hung on the cross and he said, this is how much I love you. And Andrew, in that moment, my brother, demonstrated that we have the capacity to show just a glimpse, just a shadow of the love that God has given us. Now, for years, I told that story, and it had no meaning. It had no meaning. People would go and say, what happened to Mike? And for years, I didn't know. And to tell you the truth, for a long time, I didn't care. All right? Because the story wasn't about Mike. All right? The story was about the attitude and the love my brother demonstrated. But the good news is that several years later, Mike showed up again. Just came back. And he was asking for forgiveness. And he was totally broken. And he was totally forlorn. And he was lost once again. Now think about this. My father stood at the doorway and greeted Mike. He said, Mike, I want you to know something. He said, because my son has forgiven you, and because my son is the one who loves you above all else, you're welcome in this place. And my father had to say this, because it had been up to me, in that first 3 days, if I had not had the attitude of my brother, he says, I probably would have done harm to you. Because I love my son that much. I couldn't stand to see him hurt. But because my son has welcomed you and forgiven you, you are now welcome in this place. Is that or is that not the gospel? Because of the love of the Son, we can be called the children of God. The gospel has been given to us. We have experienced the gospel. It is our calling and vocation. No matter what you do to make money in this life, it is your job to love people the same way that Christ loved us. It is your job to be the gospel in this world. This academic year and every academic year is about one thing, and that's about learning to love God in all of his fullness, so that that love goes out into this world and changes it. Let us bow our heads in a word of prayer.